Broadcasting live from the Business Radio X studios in Atlanta, Georgia, it's time for Atlanta Business Radio, spotlighting the city's best businesses and the people who lead them.
Welcome to another episode of Atlanta Business Radio. I'm your host, Kevin Finn, and it's another chilly spring day here in Atlanta. Next up on Atlanta Business Radio, we have Dr. Dan Whitenack with Occupation Professor and Consulting Psychology Group. Welcome to the show. You're sitting there patiently. I saw you writing down some notes. You're making some silly faces and grading them. So,
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem. Well, tell me just a little bit about your show or what you're doing.
Thanks. Well, I'm an industrial psychologist. I have kind of a weird job. And so I have clients that pay me to test and interview candidates that they have for different jobs. And so I've been doing this for about 20 years. And over those 20 years, I've interviewed about 15,000 people, which is a lot of people. And the interviews I do are autobiographical. In other words, I've heard about 15,000 life stories at this point. Some are more interesting than others. And over the course of those interviews, I've seen patterns emerge where when people get out of high school and they go to college and then they try to figure out what they're going to do after that, that there's really a lot of struggling that takes place in terms of trying to figure out what people should be. Mm-hmm. And so after about 15,000 of those interviews, I figured out there's got to be a better way. And I started looking at the different websites that are out there now, and I looked at how they did it, and I wasn't very happy with how they did it. And so I thought, well, I think I've got a better idea. And so I came up with a better mousetrap, so to speak.
Well, I absolutely love that, and it's true. When I got out of college, I had no idea what I wanted to do, and I mean, people just keep teaching me this or that, and I didn't have any life skills really until I moved to New York City and got my butt kicked. But I love what you're doing. Can you dig deeper into that? What's your new mousetrap? Tell me a little bit about it.
Sure. The mousetrap is really kind of a three-pronged process. So the first thing we try to do is we try to figure out what you're good at. Because in the marketplace, you're going to be competing with other people for those different occupations. And so when you compete, you need to win. You need to be one of the better candidates for that job. And so you've got to have the skill set. And so the first thing we do is, of course, you take a test. That's what psychologists do is we build tests. And so we're going to measure a bunch of different things about you. We're going to figure out whether you're analytical or not, whether you're outgoing or not, whether you're good at developing relationships or not, whether you're detailed or not, and all those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And once we figure out what you're good at, then we look at only the occupations in which you'd be a good candidate. And from that point, we go to the second part of the process, which is figuring out what you're interested in. So there are about 1,100 different occupations that are out there that are recognized by the feds. And we've taken those 1,100 occupations and we've grouped them based upon common skills and abilities that people have to have. And so once we know what you're good at, then you help us figure out what your interests are. And there's a filtering process that you go through. Just like if you were going to go on to bestbuy.com and buy a TV, you could go through a filtering process and you could tell them how big of a screen you want, how much money you want to pay, how many pixels you want, or all that kind of stuff. So we could do the same thing from a career standpoint. You tell us kind of what your interests are, how much money you want to make, how much education you want to pursue, and we'll narrow that field down for you. And so once we know what you're good at, and once you've told us what your interests are through this filtering process, then we kind of can spit out, if you will, the list of occupations that are going to be good matches for you. And you can read through them and figure out which ones are going to be the ones that you want to pursue. You can create kind of a favorites list if you want, and then go back and research them. And then we tell you what people do in those different occupations. We tell you what you'd have to study in order to get prepared for those occupations. We'll tell you whether that occupation is designed to or is projected to increase over time, or whether it's projected to decline over time. So we just tell you a lot of information about those careers so that you can make the decision if that's something that you want to pursue or not.
I absolutely love that system. The thing that you started, I was having a debate with my bosses the other day about this verse, and I know millennials, I'm sure millennials, this is very targeted towards them. We were told when we were growing up, well, do something that you like and you're passionate about. Well, I like to cook. I'm not bad at it, but I can't make a living off cooking. So I shouldn't go be a chef. It has to be something I'm good at.
Right. You're exactly right. And that's the main problem I had with the existing tests that are out there is that when you look at the other tests that are in this market, they only ask you what your interests are. And that's great. I mean, it's good to know what your interests are. But if you're interested in cooking, but you also want to make $1 million a year, those probably aren't going to match up. Some people want to make $1 million a year, but they don't want to graduate from high school. Those probably don't exist either. And so you've got to really factor in all three of those criteria, not only what you're interested in, but what you're good at, and then kind of what your target is. How much schooling are you willing to go through? I mean, some people don't like school a whole lot. When they get out of high school, they're done. They don't want to go through anymore. Some people like school; they don't mind going on forever and ever. And so it just depends on what you're looking for. There's a career for you.
Definitely. Well, you mentioned through your test, you find out what you're interested in, and what you're good at, what you're interested in, and then you guys sort of tell them what kind of education. And we were mentioning graduating from high school, but there are other further education processes that are a lot cheaper than college, because college really isn't for everyone. And I mean, I'm watching some of these kids get tracked by these for-profit schools that come out with $120,000, $200,000 in debt, and they still can't get a job. And so you really help them navigate these kind of waters.
We do. And, I had an interesting case a couple of years ago where a very smart lady came to me. She had graduated from Harvard Law School. She was $200,000 in debt at that point. And she practiced law for 2 years and said, I don't like to practice law. I don't want to practice law anymore. And the point was, gosh, it would have been nice to know that, $200,000 ago, because now you're committed, at this point. And so it just goes to show that you really should think about that beforehand. But the problem is, for most people, when you graduate high school, most people don't go on to college. And even if you do, most people are like you and me, and they just didn't have a very clear career path. I was kind of a debate geek when I was in high school, and so most of my debate geek friends go on to become lawyers later on. And I knew at some point that I didn't want to do that, but the world is wide open at that point in terms of what are you going to do? And there really aren't a lot of tools out there to kind of help people narrow that down.
Definitely. Well, I remember talking to my dad, and back in the day, they used to take career tests, which I never had to take when I was in school, and that sort of gave them at least some idea, but this seems like this could really be very helpful for high school students.
Yeah, I say that the sweet spot for this whole process is the rising high school senior, because the rising high school senior has their whole world ahead of them at that point, and you're too young to remember, Let's Make a Deal in Monty Hall, but there used to be 3 doors, and you could pick one of the 3 doors, and it would have all these prizes. But in the world of careers, there are 1,100 doors. I mean, there are a lot of doors out there that people can choose from, and people just don't know. But when you're a rising high school senior, you've got all those doors still open to you. But once you start making choices, those choices really narrow down. If you pick a college, for example, that college only offers certain majors, and those certain majors only lead to certain careers. So you've already narrowed down the choices at that point. And once you pick your first job out of college, if you go to college, you have further narrowed down what you're going to be considered for going forward. I mean, the typical case is someone who, let's say, gets a psychology degree, bachelor's degree, and then no one's beating a path to your door with a psychology bachelor's degree. And so let's just say you get hired at a call center. So let's say you're working at Verizon Wireless at a call center taking customer calls and complaints. And let's say you do that for an average of 1.5 to 2 years, which is typical. Well, who's going to be interested in you after that 2 years? The people who are going to be interested in you are going to be call centers.
Yep.
And doing the same kind of thing. And honestly, what happens is, before you know it, you're 30 years old, you're married, you got a mortgage, and you got a child, and you wonder, why am I working in call centers? Because I don't even like call centers.
And you have to pay the bills.
And you got to pay the bills, and you're pigeonholed. And you can get out of that pigeonhole, but it's difficult to do. Oftentimes, you've got to go back to school, which means, in this case, going to school at night, with all your family obligations going on, in order to change paths. And you're also probably going to have to take a step down if you're going to change careers. So it really does behoove people to think this through beforehand at an early age, earlier than most people want to. I mean, if you talk to high school and college kids, they're really not thinking long term. They're more concerned about the weekend and dating and parties and all that kind of stuff, which we were all there too. But at some point, you've got to think long term. And if you think long term and you develop that path, then it's a much straighter path. What I see is people who get out of college or high school and they just job hop. They're at a place for 2 years. They do this for 2 years,
a lot of bar backing,
a lot of bar backing, waitressing, all that kind of stuff. And you could have a much better career if it were linear, if it were a straight line instead of all the hopscotching around that I see.
Well, I think you've made this at the proper time, is like you said, with the current kids coming out of high school, their parents didn't know any better. Their parents said, well, if you go to college, you're going to get a degree. That's what I was told. I was like, just go to any college. Doesn't matter what degree you get, you'll be able to get a job, as you'll be separated. But that's not the case anymore. Everyone goes to college, and that's basically the baseline now, where high school used to be the baseline. So I think what you're doing is great. What's the reaction you've really had to this, or what step in the process are you with rolling this out?
Well, it's a relatively new website. We just rolled it out in October, and the reviews are good. Interestingly, the people who like this process the most are not the students, but they're the parents.
Definitely.
And the parents really think this is a great idea, in part because parents are paying the college bill, and they want their kids to get in and out of college as efficiently as possible. And the kids are fine with it as long as it's not too cumbersome, too intrusive, doesn't take too long. Then they're good with it, and they love the result. They do like to have the direction, but the parents are the ones who are just fawning over it more than anybody else, which is interesting because I certainly didn't anticipate that.
Definitely. Well, it makes it so much easier on them, because every parent wants their kid to succeed and be better than them, but they don't always know how to give that kind of guidance. And this is hey, let me put you through this funnel, and it's going to give you their kid 4 choices, and that makes their life a lot easier.
It does, and it also makes the college experience a lot more efficient from their standpoint. I mean, if you've got a child who's changing schools, and really about half the kids now change schools. They start off at one school, they go to a different school. More than half of the young adults change majors, and every time you change majors and you change schools, you're adding length of time to that college experience. And as everybody knows, college is very expensive. And so if you can shorten that up, make it more efficient, it's well worth $100 investment to save $10,000 from a college expense standpoint.
Definitely. Well, what are you looking more of? I would think that, especially, there's a lot of good private schools here in Atlanta, or even the public schools, that you would want your test in the system, and I think they would benefit a lot from it. Are you trying to get in front of those kind of folks, or what's the big picture for this?
Yeah, we're going to build. We already have one website. We're going to build a second one. So the first one that's been built is called OccupationProfessor.com, and it's really geared towards anybody in the general population. So you could Google it, go online, take the test, and you'd be fine. We're going to build a second website that's geared towards institutions, and so it's going to be geared towards the colleges and the universities and the schools, and so they'll be able to offer it as a service to their students. And so if you enroll in those schools, you'll be able to get that product or service in that way.
Definitely. You said it was about $100 per test?
It's $75 to get the basic membership, and then if you want the enhanced membership, then that's about $125. The enhanced membership allows you to ask questions.
Okay.
So if you took the test and you wanted to ask me or someone from my staff about different occupations, then we'd be happy to do that. So a lot of times you may take a test, you'll go through the search filtering process, and it'll say, you should be an accountant or you should be a lawyer. And the people may say, well, tell me about the lawyer job. What do people like and not like about that profession? And based on the years of experience, we can answer those questions, because every occupation has its pros and cons. There's no fantastic, perfect job out there. But as long as you know what those pros and cons are of a different career, and you're willing to accept them going in, then you'll be happy.
Definitely. Well, for my marketing mind's going, and you can just say, for the cost of one college application.
Exactly right. You're a smart man.
But also, I don't know if we can do anything at Business Radio X to help, but we have thousands and thousands and thousands of hours just talking to different professionals, and maybe there's something we can work on together where you guys can tap into that content. I mean, it's free right now. You can go online and download anything you guys want and use it, obviously, but there was a way we could organize it so these people could listen to career professionals, and they could learn their pain points and their scar tissue and learn the pros and cons. I think that might be helpful for you.
I think so too. I mean, when you do 15,000 interviews, I mean, you learn a lot. And I've interviewed people who run ranches out in Texas. I learned a lot about animal husbandry, more than I care to know about. But you just talk to people in every profession. And so I've interviewed lots and lots and lots of people like you have. And so, so you learn. And so there are really some interesting things about careers that you wouldn't know unless you talk to some people that are inside those careers. And so it'd be nice to parlay that and help people who are trying to make that decision.
Definitely. Well, how can our listeners reach out, learn more? You can give them the website.
Yeah, the website is www.OccupationProfessor.com. We tried to go with a career kind of a title, but every possible career word was taken for websites, and so we had to go with occupation. So I was a little concerned at first that people couldn't spell occupation, but I think they're okay. So I have a psychologist.
Google has a spell check. So
that's right. Google spell check, and that works. So
all right. Well, thanks for hanging out with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.